So, I had a few realizations recently that I like to discuss here. A little different scene. I'm not at the end of the day in my meditation room doing yoga and such in the dark. So, we got some light today. And I'm hoping to shed some light on how relationships come down to emotions. And when you have a relationship with someone, once you get past the physical attraction, the lust, all the pleasure seeking things, and you breached a point where there's actual love, where if the person were to disappear, you will feel pain. That pain, what I'll be talking about today, is 100% a relationship with emotions. How it's an emotional feeling, of course, the pain. They're not physical to you. There's some external thing, but your relationship to them, when they disappear, there's pain there because of that emotional connection. That's what pretty much love is. So, what I'm going to claim is that everything comes down to emotions. And ultimately, everything comes down to your relationship with yourself. And the main point here that I want to make is that it all stems back to the attachments you've had, the experiences you've had that have accumulated to develop the worldview you have through which it's a filter of the world through which you perceive and interact with everything. So that kind of dictates how you experience the world. So emotions, the idea is that emotions determine your behavior in the subtlest of ways, down to how you take a compliment, to how you perceive someone helping you out, whether you think that they're trying to take advantage of you, whether they have a trick up their sleeve, whether or not of course they're helping you out. Like you deserve to be helped. Like you're someone who needs help. You're not necessarily needing help, but you're someone who other people care about and your needs are important. So of course they will help you out. Those perspectives, those differences come down to your relationship and experiences growing up. So whether or not you were shown from your parents, whether that you can actually have a healthy relationship where people care about your needs, or did your parents come across, or your caregivers, or just pivotal people in your life when you were vulnerable and you didn't have a higher level of self consciousness to be able to filter through the reasons, such as like dad's not being with me because he has alcohol problems, or dad's being violent because he has alcohol problems, or anger issues, or something like that, or it has the self some problems that he's working on, or that he has. Instead, as a child, vulnerable, without the experience of life as you grow older, you internalize that as because of you, something about you, something that they can't see, something that no one can see, something that you can't see, or at least you can't see, but everybody else seems to be able to see, that makes you unlovable, that makes you someone who should be avoided. So that manifests itself as an adult where you're perhaps filtering everything that you experience from receiving compliments to your interactions with others to how you perceive kind gestures, your interactions with bosses at work, your relationship with men, your relationship with females, the differences, all of that comes down to whether or not you feel that people genuinely care about you, that they're capable of caring about you. And of course, it's not black or white, it's a huge weird spectrum. There's certain triggers that set it all off, and sometimes it's perfectly fine. It's complicated. Everybody has their own journey, their own series of emotional experiences that have accumulated to the world filter, the view of the world that they have, which of course is not reality. And that's a big idea here. The way we perceive the world is not reality. When you get rejected by a woman, or when you speak to a woman and she's not replying to you or whatever, and you internalize that, you have some sort of interpretation of that, that all comes down to your attachment. Whether you have like a healthy sort of attachment and you recognize that, oh, maybe he or she is busy working on something or doing something, they can still do that and still love me. They can still do that and still think about me. I can still be on their mind. I don't need to have their attention 24/7 for me to be sure that they love me. That's a cue of attachment issues where you can let them be them and not omnipresent in front of you right now and still trust that they care about you. That really comes down to how your parents or your caregivers taught you in those situations to behave. When the caregiver wasn't there, are they still caring about you? Do they still love you? Was that message delivered to you? And you carry that on into your future. And you take these for granted because of what I refer to as singleton consciousness. Singleton consciousness. The term singleton is a term borrowed from programming, but the general idea is just one instance. There's a single instance of consciousness. Usually, when we learn, we have a bunch of experiences, and we're able to pull from those experiences to get counter perspectives and to get a better, complete picture of what we're dealing with. But when it comes to self-awareness and consciousness, we're stuck with our own awareness, our own consciousness. Consciousness. We don't have someone else's consciousness to see the world through. We have our own world filter, and that's all we get. That'd be really cool. That'd be like $1 billion project right there. If somehow you're able to deliver a completely unique perspective that is unlike anything else, that counters your own, so that you can get different instances of what it's like to be self-aware, so that you can realize where your instance of self-awareness has gaps. It's not real. In fact, perhaps that's what psychedelics are all about, and psychedelic treatments for therapy and traumas and such, perhaps things like ketamine therapy, perhaps all of those come down to the ability to change your conscious state, kind of remove the past, help break down that world filter so you can view the world from a different perspective, an altered state of consciousness, psychedelic, so that you can then perhaps get a glimpse into how your current worldview isn't actual reality. And perhaps that realization, when you start to begin to realize that how I view reality is not necessarily reality, that's when things click. That's when you're able to actually make change. And that's what therapy is all about, is to try to provide that separate perspective so that you can see the world differently and realize where your single instance of consciousness could have gaps or flaws. It's really hard to do. Psychedelics help with it quickly. Medications, perhaps, I'm not sure, like those for depression or whatever that change certain imbalances in chemicals, whatever the case might be, whether that's true or not. It's basically, there's things that alter hormones when it comes to like birth control and those things. Like there's a whole host of things that just change how you view the world. And at the end of the day, how you view the world is not reality. That's the big picture here. And this has important implications because when someone is not replying to you, the message, and you start to feel that insecurity or fear in you, you can recognize, you can, what I would say is view that like a scary movie. When you watch a scary movie, you feel real emotions. You feel fear. It's scary. You're like in it. But you know you're slightly detached from it. You know that that isn't reality. You're separated enough. And so what I'm saying is perhaps when you have a fear-based experience, something that triggers you, try to build a habit of viewing that from an observer, from the perspective of a scary movie. Yes, it will feel scary. That's what scary movies are all about. You will feel fear. That's the idea. It takes you on a journey. Roller coasters, you will feel all of the emotions involved, the excitement, the fear, the anticipation, anxiety, all those. You will feel them. So it's not about not feeling them. It's about realizing that that isn't reality so that you can then get the higher level awareness perspective, kind of like bird's eye view looking down, to then decide how you actually wish to advance moving forward. So even when you have a lot of times with families, so perhaps your mother or your father, you have a strange relationship that has just unfolded itself over the years, where now your interactions with them are easy to trigger certain past patterns. You can perhaps view that from the perspective of, oh, before I would interact with my mom or whatever, my dad, and they would do this thing. Now interpret them as being narcissistic or being they're trying to get one up on me or they have their hidden agenda. Realize that that's not necessarily reality. And perhaps I'm fortunate enough to have enough of those altered instances of experience that shifting a perspective, despite my singleton consciousness, I believe I have had enough experiences in my life that counter my worldview, where I was so confident in something being reality, and then it just broke. it wasn't reality. I realized how wrong I was, despite feeling how confident I am. And not just having those experiences, but looking at them, digging into them, writing, reflecting, trying to understand why you were wrong instead of running from it, which many people do. They feel that discomfort of I was wrong. I thought I was confident. Let's brush it off. Maybe it was their fault. It's not my fault. I did everything was right. They're just not understanding, and perhaps even walk away being more confident. So I believe that is a core piece here as well. Is that in order to fix this, you need altered perspectives. You need, whether it's psychedelics or therapy or someone else, like to have these relationship issues, you need another perspective. You can't just sit in a dark room, at least not at first, perhaps, because you need to challenge the assumptions you've had of that this is how people behave. Like when someone gives me a compliment, they have a hidden agenda trying to get influence over me so that they could take advantage of me in the future. To challenge that, to see that when you give a compliment to someone, how they take it can suggest how their attachment styles are. Such as if you give a compliment to someone, or you say that I'm going to give you a review because I feel like your job here has been incredibly well. You looked at my sink and my plumbing and such, and I want to leave a review, mention your name, put it on Google Reviews, mention you so that the company can see that you were doing well and you get some benefit from it. Some people would be like, oh, you don't have to do that. It's all right. And they're just brush it off. Like as if, or they look at you suspiciously. Like, why would they do that? What's in it for them? Those are signs of how their experiences that have shaped their worldview for how they interact with the world. Some people, you might say that and be like, wow, that's so kind of you. I would love that. That would help me out a lot. Those are people who have had experiences where they see that people can be genuine and kind and help others out. And that's a huge advantage that because you're able to like kind of filter out the fluff of the the behaviors of people, and that's kind of the big idea here. This is an action item where you can use these ideas of these relationships and your own traumas really from just self-examination, and then like realize them in others. Once you start seeing these, it's something you can't unsee. When you like give compliments and how they react to them, or when you go dark because you're working on something for a day and how your partner responds. If you're in a relationship and your partner gets very aggressive or defensive, or they act in some emotional way from you having a busy day and not being able to text them, then perhaps you just need to sit down with them and try to get to the core of the issue. Like, try to understand them, why they're coming across that way, because that's big. That emotions like form our worldview, and if you ignore that in somebody, then you're missing how they view the world, a fundamental piece of how they view the world, whether it's a safe place to interact with, whether people genuinely care about them, whether people think about them when they're not around. Like these are fundamental things of how we view and thus interact with the world. And if you're in a relationship with someone, that's huge to understand. Because if you don't, then you don't truly understand that person. You don't really know who you're with. You don't know if they're a good partner, if they'll make a good father, a good mother, a good anyone, a good friend. Like your relationship really comes down to the emotional side. That's what all this comes down to. And coming back to the previous example of once you get past all the physical pleasures and such, and you start to get to the phase of a relationship where you have some emotional attachment, where you kind of have that point where if they disappear, you feel pain. That is where emotions start to get intertwined with them, and that's where those patterns come up. So it's you know how they say like after 6 months or after a year, relationships have like a 70% chance, 75% chance of failing after that point. A lot of the times that's because the emotions are now getting intertwined. So now the patterns of the past come up, the traumas, the triggers. Now you're vulnerable. And people will have very strange responses to these that can either make them completely avoidant or anxious when it comes to how they handle these attachments. They could start to shut down, push the other person away, even subconsciously, just because the patterns of how they interacted with their parents in the past or others that they got close to start to come up. And the whole point with all this is that the awareness of it builds compassion, it builds understanding, it builds appreciation because you can start looking at yourself with some self respect because you don't see yourself as fundamentally broken. You see yourself like everyone else is. We have a series of experiences that contribute to how we view the world. We can't help it a lot of times because those experiences were done onto us. It's not someone else's fault. It's just the weird, complex navigation of relationships and sort of the natural nature-based self-focus we have of trying to optimize our own well-being while still navigating the social construct in a way that we are able to satisfy our needs. And all that comes down to how we end up growing up and interacting with others. And sometimes there's like your father might be going through something emotional that he hasn't worked through. And because of that, he shows up in a certain way that leads to trauma for you. Not his fault. He doesn't know. You can stop kicking that can down the road by building that awareness, self-compassion, doing the work on yourself. And a lot of times that involves physical demanding work that demands that you look inwards. A lot of people who've gone through hardship are the most creative, are the most self-aware, and I think that's because those hardships demand that they look at themselves. The awareness goes in because when you're physically in pain, even emotionally in pain, when you have like a really bad stomach ache, there's a lot of internal awareness. You kind of forget what goes on the outside world. Perhaps you just got out of a breakup, and then all of a sudden, like you have a leak in your basement or something, and then the only thing you seem to care about is getting that fixed. Like the breakup is just almost side to everything else. Of course, there's still some like lingering emotions there, but like that idea of shifting in priorities comes up. And that's because at the end of the day, we're fundamentally wired for self sustaining our own lives and our own well being. So, big takeaways from today, I think, is that there's a lot of value in realizing how your view of the world, how you show up, how you interact with the world comes down to your emotions and your relationship with those emotions, the triggers, the past, and that it's not a bad thing. It's completely fine. It's normal. Everyone has this. You can't go through life without it because in order to make a decision, you need past experiences. And the decision you make then accumulates into future decisions because that's now an experience that's added to your repertoire. I have this whole concept of initial conditions where the first experiences you've had, such as in childhood, as a baby, are the most profound at influencing how you view the world. And subsequent in experiences, such as you get older, like what they say about your personality becoming more and more rigid, comes down to simply that you've had enough experiences in that sense that it's each new experience is just a small percentage of your overall understanding of that realm. And so the initial conditions is a big thing. And I think there's ways to shift that up. You can transition periods are huge, like going between semester to semester, buying a new house, making a big move or a new relationship. These are transition periods. Even at the end of the day or beginning of a day, these transition periods you can leverage to hook into and change things because you basically have a change of environment, a change of scenery, change of cues to your mind, the patterns that you're trying to enact based off of the stimulus coming in, and you're able to like change that. You have a hook in there with these transition periods, insert a new habit so that you're not influenced. Because basically, the idea of a transition period is you have different cues coming in, different stimulus. It's not the same routine every day anymore. You're in a new house, so you have different walls, different rooms, different patterns. You just have to have a different routine. And as a result, you are able to use that as a fresh set of initial conditions. It's why a lot of people say that they want to move to another state or whatever for a fresh start. That's a transition period. So you can use that to change your life. If you're not happy with where things are now, what you can do is you can go to the gym. You can change up your environment, change up your friends, change up your scenery so that you have different stimulus, different cues coming in so that you're not automatically trying to fill in patterns based off of the past experiences you've had that have a lot of experiences perhaps accumulating to a more fixed worldview. You can shift that up. Another big takeaway is the fact that we have one consciousness, one experience. And so it's hard to truly step out of that and realize that how you view reality is not necessarily reality. which is a huge insight, a huge realization, because that is freedom, honestly. Because you're not caged anymore to a single perspective. You can realize that just because you feel that this situation or how this person is acting, the emotional pain you're feeling, even though how real that feels, like while watching a scary movie, it's not reality. That's not necessarily, you might feel with 100% certainty that this person is ignoring you because they're getting ready to break up with you or because they're with another person cheating on you. You're so confident in that. And even if that may be true sometimes, which again, back to the initial conditions, if that was true the first time you had that feeling, guess what? The next time that that happens, you'll be so much more confident in that being true, which is unfortunate. Hopefully, you are able to realize the power of initial conditions so that when you start a new relationship or something, you can you you do what's best for you at the end of the day. Even if it means interpreting a situation a little bit different than reality, but in a way that promotes a healthy emotional state moving forward, that will do you good. Where you're you recognize times where you're wrong, where you had an assumption and you were wrong. You thought this person was with another person or cheating, but then you found evidence that they weren't, that they were just busy. And despite your strong beliefs that this person is bad, that they're texting all these other men or women, but you realize that they never were, and that they're actually honest and what they say that they're doing, they're actually doing. Like really, those are the times, the initial conditions that are important to counter that perspective you have, so that you can then change the worldview you have and the filter through which that all of the input, the stimulus goes through, which then accumulates or compounds into how you actually see the world, which as a result interact with the world. Okay, pivotal trash.